I'm Michelle Boxall, and welcome to Behind the Eight Ball. When the odds are stacked against you, how do you get out in front? In IBTV's new series, we will hear about the failures and near failures along the road to success for many of the industry's esteemed CEOs and leaders. We hope we can all learn from these stories and that they will provide inspiration for new and future successes for the industry. So, with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce Sven Kili. Welcome, Sven.
Thank you very much.
You're our second Behind the Eight Ball after Claudia Zilberberg. Very big welcome. Another CGT heavyweight.
Thank you so much. I am really, really delighted and honored to be here. I saw your interview with Claudia, and it was absolutely inspirational. I have known Claudia professionally and as a friend for many, many years, and I still learned so much about her. So I'm really excited about today.
Sorry. She was amazing. I know you're going to be just as interesting and amazing. So let's get started. I'm going to need my notes for this. Today, you're an experienced cell and gene therapy senior leader and board member, an experienced pharmaceutical physician and clinician with extensive surgical and medical clinical experience with a strong patient focus. You have your own consulting company and are an investment advisor for Sise Ventures, a Chief Development Officer for CCRM and Omnia Bio, and you chair the BIA Cell and Gene Therapy Committee, UK Innovation Hubs, ISCT's Business Development and Finance Committee, miss me. In addition to holding a visiting chair at UCL for the MSc in Cell and Gene Therapy Manufacturing Commercialization. Need several breaths. You previously sat on the board of Syntella, the board of CCRM, and the Sanders coordinating body. I really don't know how you find time to sleep. Looking back, what do you think set you along this path and on to many accomplishments?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. First of all, probably a little bit of insomnia. But I would say what really set me along the path was my grandmother. And I know maybe that sounds a little cliched, but she was an incredible woman. Neither of my parents went to university. My grandmother grew up during two wars, one of which was the First World War. And she was an amazing woman. And she was actually the very first person in our family to go to university. And so she brought with her a real curiosity about life. And when I was growing up, I would spend a lot of time with her and often ask her questions about schoolwork, and she would never, ever help me or tell me the answers. And it made me so angry. All she would do is say, go and look it up. And so off I would toddle and look it up, and I would come back because she'd say, come back and tell me the answer. As soon as I did that, she would say, why? And that would stump me. So I'd have to go off and look again. And so over the years, I became very comfortable with the question, why? And that questioning really helped me within my academic pursuits. Sadly, after I left school, I spent a number of years in the military. And as you can imagine, asking why all the time, especially during basic training, really doesn't work very well. So I had to come up with some new tactics. And during my time in the military, I discovered within myself an ability to withstand adversity and to put up with tough times. And that taught me real mental and physical resilience. And those two strengths, as I see them, really carried through. And so when I became a surgeon and I worked as a trauma and orthopedic surgeon, both in the UK, but also in South Africa, I found that my ability to triage and focus down on what really was critically important served me very well. As you can imagine, trying to stabilize a gunshot victim or a road traffic accident in a very busy emergency department, or even on the side of the road where I used to work a lot, is very, very challenging. There are a lot of noises. There are often people trying to shoot at you. And so being able to focus down on one thing is critically important. And I tried to translate that into what I was doing in a more sedate pace, but as I was working through my career. And so really focusing on what counts, I have found worked very well for me.
Sounds amazing. Your grandmother sounds amazing. So Before we get into your behind the eight ball story, can you tell us a little bit about your approach to failure and experience of it? Not how you feel about it now, but how you felt about it then and before your eight ball experience.
Yeah. So once again, I'm going to start with my grandmother. She always told me there's no such thing as failure, just an opportunity to try again. And as a young man, I listened to that and, I had that typical teenager reaction. Yeah, what do you know? And I really struggled with not understanding what she was telling me. And so it took me a long time to really realize that. And I found during my young years, I was treading the same path that everyone expected of me, particularly as a clinician training, going through those steps. But I never really felt engaged with life, and I never felt really rewarded as if I was going anywhere. But as I started maturing, I started thinking back on her comments about failure, because up until then, I was chasing the lack of failure or the rejection of failure. And I started thinking about that. And when I started thinking about failure as a way to learn again, that allowed me to start exploring what really makes me happy. And it was some of that thinking that allowed me to start deciding new ways for my life. And that way of thinking has allowed me to step away from the traditional way of creating a lifestyle or a career, and allowed me to think in different ways. And that's translated into the cell and gene therapy space, where I've been able to look at different ways of developing therapies, different ways of approaching patients. And so I think that advice, it's finally coming to pass. I'm finally starting to understand it. I don't fully understand myself yet, but I'm very much a work in progress.
Yeah, I love that. You hear it a lot with leaders. They're always wanting to evolve and never thinking that they're at the end of their path. There's always new things to learn. So, Sven, now can you tell us your eight ball story and what you learned from it?
So my eight ball story, this is a tough one. I have to admit. Shortly after leaving full-time clinical medicine, I came into the pharmaceutical space, and I had grown up in medicine and academia with very much the standard pathway. So within medicine and within surgery, you go forward, you write an exam, you're allowed to do the next stage, and then you move forward, and then you stop and you write another exam, and then you're allowed to do something else. And I had grown up with that. And so doing exams in order to progress was normal for me. And so when I left full-time clinical medicine and I started in this weird pharmaceutical industry space, I came straight into the cell and gene therapy space. And I was learning about these pharmaceutical physicians. And what I found out was there is an exam that you are supposed to write, put on by the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Physicians. And so with my old thinking that you have to pass an exam, otherwise you are nothing. And so I duly went ahead to write this exam. Now, the thing that's important here is you are supposed to do the work that you were tested on in your day job.
Right.
And so it's designed very much as a part of your professional development. What nobody told me was that the exam was set up for small molecules and large molecules. The examiners, the board, no one doing this had ever even dreamt of cell and gene therapy. And so I went into this exam, and as you can imagine, I failed it. Now, this was the first academic failure I had ever had. And I watched my entire life crumble in front of me. I was useless. I wouldn't be able to hack it in this space. And I went to the examiners and I went to speak to them, and they were like, cell and gene? That's not going to go anywhere. Now, you need to remember, this is 2004, 2005, and they weren't interested in cell and gene therapy at all. And so I was absolutely crestfallen. I have to say here, I really, really struggled. And I spent a lot of time reflecting on this and thinking, how much time should I put aside now to study and do this exam again? Because obviously I have to have this exam. And I have to credit my wife here. She helped me to think about it and actually realize what is important. And she helped me to realize that an exam is only as good as the day that you write it and as relevant as it is. And it became very clear to me that the pharmaceutical physician exam was not relevant whatsoever to what I was doing. But that took me quite a long time to get past.
Yeah.
And so once I got past that, I was able to realize, hang on a moment, what is really important here is creating therapies for patients. And you don't need a bunch of exams to be able to do that. But it changed the way I think. And so that allowed me to take those new lessons into pharmaceutical development in the cell and gene therapy space. And so where the typical pharmaceutical physicians do phase 1, phase 2, blah, 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 I looked at cell and gene therapies and thought, hang on a moment, why do we need to do all of that? Why do we need to do all of the preclinical work? Think about an autologous therapy.
Yeah.
You have to show overdose. How do you show overdose if you're giving the patient their own cells?
Yeah.
And so there were a number of areas like this that I just thought, hang on a moment, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
As
To rewrite
precisely.
in the
Precisely. And so I ended up spending a lot of time with regulators discussing this with them and found out that they are much more open to being more pragmatic, more risk-based medicine development. And that's really helped me in the way I think about life.
Yeah.
So I have to say I went from really the pits of doom and gloom to a point now where I look very much at people that I hire and I'm less concerned about the number of letters they have behind their name than the attitude and the experience that they can bring. So that's my behind the 8 ball story.
Yeah, that's a really good story. There's some good lessons to learn there. And it seems as though that failure kind of gave you the impetus to go on and innovate.
Absolutely. It really helped me to refocus.
Yeah.
And to take that shift away from the traditional way of doing things and thinking what's really important. So once again, it comes down to what is the critical thing in amongst all the noise that we need to focus on. And that helped me move away from getting more letters behind my name to actually, no, there's a patient there and we need to do the best we can for the patient with what we have. And so it was like a light coming on, but it took a long time to come on.
And then moving on to your headline success, which there are many, so I'm not sure which one to go for. I'll let you tell us a little bit about your successes.
Thank you, Michelle. I've been very, very fortunate in my life, and I've been very fortunate to work with a number of incredible people. But I would have to say my headline successes have been the 2 advanced therapies that I've had approved. And so I led the development of the first combined advanced therapy, which was a cell therapy, which I had approved in Europe. And that was absolutely incredible at a time when we just weren't seeing these therapies being approved. And then the second one was when I had the first ex vivo gene therapy approved, and that was Strimvelis. And I know now we talk a lot about the success of cell and gene therapies, and everyone focuses on the Kymriahs and the Yescartas and the CAR-Ts, and they are really, really important, and they do amazing things to patients' lives. But those first gene therapies, Strimvelis, and now more recently Libmeldi, which I led those programs, those were the true heroes of gene and cell therapy. I mean, we have technology. Strimvelis has saved every patient's life who has received it. And the first patient that received it is now something in the line of 20 years post-treatment and leading an absolutely normal life. And so we often forget about those early successes.
Yeah.
And, even Macy, the first combined advanced therapy, which was a cell-based therapy, that has allowed thousands and thousands of patients to delay or not even have knee replacements by correcting their cartilage defects. And so I'm really, really proud of the work I've done with the teams. I did not do it on my own. I had amazing, incredible teams with me, but to say that I could contribute to those So that's probably one. And I'm going to be cheeky and say there's another one. So when I was at Genzyme, I oversaw another product called Epicel, and it was a humanitarian use device. And this was essentially new skin that we could grow for patients. And it was used for just a few patients every year. And whilst I was there, we got a very frantic call from a mother in South Africa. And her 2-year-old daughter had been caught in an exploding bonfire, and she was completely engulfed in flames. She had over 90% of her body burnt completely. She was 6 hours away from the closest trauma center. And this woman had bundled her daughter up, driven her to the closest hospital. They took one look at her and said, "She's dead. We're not doing anything." So she bundled her off to the next hospital. They did the same thing, but thank goodness there was an ambulance there. They put her in the back of this ambulance and drove 6 hours to the closest trauma center. During that time, she had 2 cardiac arrests. They resuscitated her. They got her into the center and they stabilized her. She had, I think, 2 or 3 more cardiac arrests. She went into kidney failure. She went into renal failure. They did a variety of things to stabilize her, but she was over 90% of her body was full thickness burns. She became aware of this Epicel technology, and she reached out to us begging and pleading. And so I was really fortunate to be the lead person on that. I flew out to South Africa and oversaw having 2 tiny little biopsies, like literally 2 little pens, biopsies taken from her. We flew that back to the States and we grew new skin for her. I flew out to South Africa and I supported her plastic surgeon in giving her new skin. And this young lady was absolutely incredible. She's alive now. Granted, she has some mental issues with brain damage and things like that. She's at school. She's functioning normally, and I have regular contact with her mother still.
That is an amazing story.
And that was a real privilege to be part of that and to be part of her life.
Yeah, that's just absolutely amazing. Just quickly going back to your failure story, you remember you were saying about how you felt, so it took such a long time to kind of get over. When then you talked about your successes, I wonder, just because you'd think that you could take those successes, you can live off them for the rest of your life. I mean, in terms of intensity of feeling, do they compare? I can imagine that feeling of devastation that, my world isn't going in the direction I thought it was going to go. It's actually can be really traumatizing. Whereas, do you feel the same of it? Is it exhilarating when you move on and have a success, or does it feel different?
It is. I think I'm very fortunate in that those real doldrums and the real negativity was almost self-limiting. So as time has gone by, those scars have healed. The highs of being able to help those patients. I mean, even now when I talk about Pippi, this was her name, Pippi. Even now I still feel emotional because having kids myself, I can only begin to imagine what her parents went through. And I just feel so honored that I could be part of that solution.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really special place to be. And so for that, I can live on forever. She wrote it, her mother wrote a book, and, our photographs are in there, and it was really very, very special. So to be part of making a difference in patients' lives, I think is just the greatest gift.
Yeah, I agree. So moving on from that success story, which we're then raising to listen to, just thinking about, like you said earlier, you've got many of these accomplishments, but you attributed some of that as having the right team around you. How do you galvanize the team? What's your leadership style?
My leadership style is continually developing because I think, I think I've always got a lot of learning to do, but I try and focus my leadership on three things. The first thing is authenticity. And so I think the way I think about that is we go to a lot of lengths to hire the right people, and we hire smart people, and we hire people who are driven, and we pay headhunters a lot of money to find them. We do lots of interviews. We go to a lot of trouble to find these people. And I think if you are not authentic with them, and you are not authentic in everything you do and say, you wasted your time, because these are not idiots. They know when you're being authentic and when you aren't, no matter how good a poker player you think you are. So I think authenticity is absolutely critical. The next thing that I think is really, really important is communication and honesty. If you don't communicate to people, they know it. If you're trying to hide something, they will always pick up on it.
Yeah.
And so, especially thinking about the last few years that we've gone through in the macroeconomic environment when companies have struggled, things like that, if you are not honest with your staff and the people around you, I think you lose that trust and you're not being authentic. So I think that is critically important. And then the last thing is empathy. I think the importance of being empathic or empathetic, it just cannot be understated. Our lives now are so busy, and even though we work long hours at work, people bring one persona or one face to work, but everyone has other things happening. And you don't know if that person is facing a divorce, they're looking after a family member, they've had a bereavement. We don't know what happens in people's personal lives. And so I think being empathetic towards people in the workplace to allow that feeling of understanding and to also realize that people have other things going on in their lives, I think is really important to being able to get the best out of people.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I often think that, when dealing with staff, I'm thinking giving a directive, and are they taking it in the way that I'm explaining it? Even in my own journey, I think I'm like you say, it's one of those, you're always learning how to improve and how to engage differently in different ways.
Absolutely. And I think, as I'm not going to presume, but I'll say as we get older, we have in our orbits, work orbits and everything, we have people of all ages. And as we well know, a Gen Xer versus a Gen Z respond in different ways. They communicate in different ways. And I think, I don't honestly think we have to learn all of the new lingo and terminology, but I think we need to understand that it's different.
Yeah.
And we need to be open to that difference.
Yeah.
And then if you're like me, you have to call your daughters in often and ask them to explain and translate.
So we've had some really great insights from you, Sven. What's one piece of advice that has served you well in the industry?
One piece of advice. I think the most important thing for me, and probably the best advice I've been given, I live by and that I give other people, is it's all about the patient. So we're engaged in developing advanced therapies, be they cell therapies, gene modified cell therapies, tissue engineering, it doesn't really matter. But why are we here? We're developing them for patients. If it wasn't for the patients, we wouldn't have a job and we wouldn't have these amazing challenges. And so for me, it's all about the patient. And that doesn't mean that if you work in manufacturing or behind a desk, that you can forget about the patient. You may not have direct contact with the patient, and all your decisions may not be directly related to the patient, but indirectly, they always are related to the patient. And so for me, that's my absolute North Star.
Great piece of advice. So Sven, how have your ambitions evolved over the years, and what do you still hope to accomplish?
So much to do. I think my ambitions over the last 20 years really have remained exactly the same. And that has been to develop the best therapies for patients to improve their lives. Now, what has changed is how I've gone about that. So, the early parts, as I've already mentioned, I've managed to develop 2 advanced therapies and have them approved. And I've worked very much in that clinical development. I've then also built companies and worked in that space. And as I'm getting further and deeper towards the end of my career, I'm now starting to focus on building the companies of tomorrow. So that's that investing in new companies and creating the therapies and the leaders of tomorrow. Also working with amazing companies like CCRL and Omnia to help them think about what does the future look like of cell and gene therapies? What are the areas that they should focus on that they'll be able to support the ecosystem in the coming years? And then also it's thinking about what are the other exciting areas? How else can I contribute? And that's part of what led me to my role as chairing the UCL committee for the MSc in cell and gene therapy manufacturing and commercialization. So there I'm able to speak with and work with a lot of young people and help them think about the future, help guide them as to where their future in cell and gene therapy lies. And last is also a new secret little project that I'm doing with you and with Lee Buckler. And so we're very much looking forward to that. And that's going to be a way for everybody to have access to some of the most important, educated, bright, ambitious, incredible key opinion leaders around the world. So keep a lookout for the announcement for that exciting project coming soon.
Yes, I'm very, very excited for that. Thanks, Sven. It's been an absolute pleasure and looking forward to working with you in the future. But for now, thanks so much for taking part.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Michelle, and for allowing me to be the second person. I'm really, really excited about this.
Thank you.